Good morning, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started, although I think we're still missing quite a few people. I guess they will pop in as they can. I'm Shelley Stone. I'm the Share Manager for Bibliographic Services with Illinois Heartland Library System. With me today, I have Edie Elliott, and she is moderating. You might have to say something, but I can see you.
Good morning.
You can always feel free to unmute yourself. We did make sure that everybody was muted automatically when they joined the session today. But if you want to ask a question, especially at question time, unmute yourself or feel free to type in the chat at any time you would like. Edie will make sure that I see those if I am on a spiel and I forget to look at the chat. The class will be 3 hours long. I will try to give a 10-minute break right about 10 o'clock and then a quick 5-minute stretching break at 11. You should have 3 handouts today: the pattern heading table, the slides from today if you wanted those, and then a practice sheet that we'll work on for the second half of the class. Those were all on L2. I will share them on the screen later, though, if you didn't happen to get them. But if you have time to print, especially the practice sheet and the pattern headings, that would help you later on throughout the class. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my picture, and I'll share my screen, and we'll get started. I think hold on, let me try that again. Okay, I think you are seeing the right slide right now without my notes, hopefully.
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. These are the topics that we're going to be talking about today. We'll talk about what a resource is about and how we assign subject terms. We'll also look at the MARC coding of subject headings, both in the bib record and in the authority record. And we'll be looking at these from the standpoint of creating original records, but also when looking at existing records in Connection or in Polaris and evaluating the headings in the record. And like I mentioned in the last part of the class, we'll be doing some searching in the authority file and trying to add subject headings to the practice sheet. So just to start this off, what term would you use to say what she is wearing? And feel free to unmute yourself or type in the chat, either way. So I'm talking about her top. What would you call it? Blouse. I see top, shirt, tunic. Okay, good. Lots of good terms. So, oh, I see sweater. Good. So some of these terms are really broad, like clothing, apparel, and attire. And others are more precise, such as the shirt, top, And we can't really tell what kind of material it is, but it could be a knit top or a sweater or a blouse. All are terms you might use to describe this article of clothing. Now, if you're doing a Google search or if you're on like a Macy's website and you're trying to find clothing and you type in one of those terms, are you led to exactly what you're looking for? Well, sometimes when you're on a website, you are led to another term that gets you the results that you're looking for, but not always. Controlled vocabulary establishes consistent terms to bring together resources on a particular subject. LC subject headings are an example of a controlled vocabulary, but there's many others. So controlled vocabularies establish authorized terms to be used consistently in bib records. The terms are recorded in authority records along with cross-references and instructions. Many of you may have attended the Introduction to Authority Records class that was last month. And we talked about how sometimes we have a preferred term like soft drinks. And if we search under pop or soda, it might direct us to soft drinks in a catalog. We also talked about how the authority record separates resources that use the same term but has different meanings. And the example we used was cardinals. So, are we talking about the bird or the clergy or cardinal numbers or maybe even the baseball team? Subject strings are a way of making a search more focused. It takes a main subject term and adds additional terms called subdivisions to narrow it to a particular aspect of that term. And we'll see how that works as we go along. And subject strings are constructed in two different ways. Sometimes they're already created in an authority record, but sometimes the cataloger builds them. And we look at the authority record to determine when we can add a subdivision to a particular term. This is an example of what a browse search would look like. And in fact, our Polaris database, we can only see this kind of thing when we do a browse search. But it shows the main topic, France, and then all of the subdivisions that give you a narrower focus. If we were looking for the people of France, then we could look under France biography. If we were looking for books with lots of photographs of France, we could look under France pictorial works. Or maybe we're trying to decide where to stay when we go to France. So, description and travel might be what we click on to get those resources. Library of Congress subject headings are an example of a controlled vocabulary, as I said. Subject headings are established by LC catalogers. It used to be in this big set of red books that really got your muscles, it gave you a workout each day. But now we can access those on the LC website at authorities.loc.gov or in Connection or in the cataloger's desktop. These are some of the terms that we'll be talking about today. A subject heading or term is the authorized term or the term that can be used in the bib record. Subject subdivisions are various elements that are added to the initial subject terms, like we saw in the slide for France when we saw pictorial works and history and all of those subdivisions after it. Then subject heading strings are the term plus the subdivision. And pattern headings we'll talk about a little bit later, but they're examples of subdivisions that can be used with similar subjects to give additional subdivisions that you might want to use in your record. This is what the LCSH terms look like. They take on lots of different forms. Sometimes they're just a single word, usually a noun. Sometimes the term has a qualifier after it in parentheses. So in this example, we're talking about the iris, the part of the eye, not the flower. Sometimes there are phrases like career plateaus, and other times there are inverted phrases. So this means that the noun comes first and then the modifier. And originally, this was done for collocation. So we could look under medicine and we could find the medicine for um, the Arab medicine, the Chinese medicine, the Greek medicine, whatever we were looking for right there all together. And we wouldn't have to go to the A's and the C's and the G's to look for them. With keyword searching, these are less prevalent than they used to be. And so you may find that they are in the natural order again for some phrases. Then there are the series of nouns like law, reports, digests, etc. There are some uniform titles like the Bible in LCSH. Then there are personal names and corporate names. And keep in mind that we can use uniform titles or personal names or corporate names, any of those as subjects of our work. So if someone wrote a biography about me, first of all, it would be pretty short and pretty boring, I suppose, but the subject heading would be Stone, comma, Shelley, and then maybe my birth date or something to distinguish me from any other Shelley Stone, if there was one in the authorities already. This is what the capitalization looks like on the subjects. So always the first letter is capitalized, and then the first letter of the subdivision. For inverted phrases, the inverted extension is capitalized, and the qualifier is capitalized inside the parentheses, the first word anyway of the qualifier, and then the first word of the phrase as well. And this is just an example of the capitalization, again, with a real example, but also notice how everything is kind of mixed together. We have just the term, we have terms with subdivisions, we have terms with qualifiers, we even have a place in there, reading England, and that's where it would file alphabetically. So we're not talking about reading books or, literature, whatever. We're talking about a place there, right there in the middle of our our results. Now we're going to look at some examples, and in particular, we're going to start by looking at some of the MARC coding of the authority records, just to review what we did in Introduction to Authorities last month, or if you didn't watch that one, then this might help you to review what you already know. So the 0XX fields in the authority record are numbers like the LCCN number, the Library of Congress class number that would be assigned to that subject, um, and some other numbers. Does anybody know off the top of their head what the 1XX field is? This is the most important field of the authority record, really, because it gives us the authorized form or the preferred form that we would be um, putting in as our subject heading in the record. The 3XX gives us attributes, complex see also references. And then the 4XX of the authority gives us the unauthorized term or C references. So those are the terms that cannot be used in the bib record, but they do lead us to the preferred term that we can find in an authority record in the 1XX. The 5XX is where we can find related terms. Might be a broader term, a narrower term, but these are see also references. So they usually have an authority record of their own, where in that case, that term would be in the 1XX. But these are the terms where you would get a see also reference to the term in the 1XX of the authority record. The 6XX are the notes. This is where you find the scope note, or in other words, when to use that subject heading, the sources that were consulted when the authority record was created. The 7XX are linking fields. We'll look at some of those in just a little bit, especially with geographic headings. And then there are some fixed field elements that we will go through as well, ones that tell us about the usage, whether we can use it as a subject or not, whether we can subdivide geographically, and the source and the rules that were used. So the um, the fields that start with a 1 are all the authorized term. The authorized form will always be in a field that starts with a 1, but then the next two digits tell more specifically the type of term. So if the second two numbers are 00, then it would be a personal name. So for example, we would have Ford, Henry and his dates as a personal name heading. Or we could have a corporate name heading and a 110, and that would be something like Ford Motor Company. A 111 is a meeting name. Just off of the top of my head, the Olympics comes to mind as a meeting name. A uniform title, the one I mentioned earlier, was the Bible, so it brings together all of the books of the Bible, and that goes in the 130. Any kind of a topical term will be in a 150, so cars or automobiles is probably the correct term. I was trying to stick with my Ford Motor Company example, and I got slightly off track there. I think it's automobiles, most likely. Then the 151 is a geographic name, so Detroit, Michigan. The 155 is a genre or form term. And so this is not what the item is about, but what it actually is. So something like historical fiction or um, audiobooks is a form term. The 180 is a topical subdivision. The 181 is a geographic subdivision. The 182 is a chronological subdivision or a time frame. And the 185 is a form subdivision. Sorry, I didn't give examples of all of those. Topical subdivision would be like history. Geographic subdivision would just be a place name like Michigan. Chronological subdivision could be 20th century. It could be Civil War, 1861 through 1865. A form subdivision would be pictorial works. So we'll look at all of those. Here is an authority record for archaeology. The authorized term in this case is under a 150. So again, we said the authorized term is always beginning with a 1. So in this case, the second and third digits are 50 because it's a topical term. That means when we're looking at it, it would tell us to put it in a 650 in the bib record because the 600s or 6XX fields are all subject headings in the bib record. So if we're using this as a subject, we put it in the 650. The 450 in the authority record is that unused term, but if I typed archaeology in a catalog with that spelling, I would be led to the authorized term. A broader term is listed, actually a couple of them are listed here in the 550s. So those are see also references. You can also see that we have the 010 with the Library of Congress control number. For this record, the prefix says this is a subject. So it says SH to show it's a subject heading. The 040 is just the Library of Congress in this case, or the agency that entered the record. The 053 is where we find the LC call number suggestion. So not that you have to use that if you use LC call numbers, but it's just telling you that CC might be where you would want to classify it. Some records would also have the 082 or 083 with suggested Dewey call numbers. Let's see, anything else? Oh, I had a related term down here, antiquities. And then up in the fixed field elements, we see subject use, which tells us that it may be used as a subject because it's coded with an A. If it was coded with a B, that would mean we cannot use it as a subject. And then this subject code A means that it is a Library of Congress subject heading. Under geographic subdivision, that I means that it can be geographically subdivided. A blank or kind of a black square would mean that it cannot be geographically subdivided. And that just means whether you can put a place after that to create a string to say archaeology in Illinois. So whether we can do a Suffield Z Illinois after archaeology. Not every heading can be subdivided geographically. So that's a very important element in the fixed field. This is an example of an adult level heading. So we're looking at the authority record for treasure troves. We see the prefix in the 010 is SH again to show that it's a subject heading. And then we also find some references, some C references in the 450, which tell us we cannot use buried treasure or sunken treasure or treasure trove singular as subject headings, but they would lead us to treasure troves without a dash. And then a 550, which is a C also. In share, we always use the adult level subject heading, but if there's a separate children's subject term that is different than the adult term, we use that in our record as well. As you can see at the very bottom of the screen in blue, we have how it would be coded in a bib record. So let's say you have an adult book. You would use a 650 with a second indicator 0, treasure troves, period. But if you had a juvenile level book about treasure troves, you would use the 650 with the second indicator 0, treasure troves, and then you would put a Suffield V in to say juvenile literature or juvenile fiction, depending on what it was. And again, we have the subject showing that it is a Library of Congress subject heading. And there's that SH that I mentioned to show that it is a subject heading. Now this is an example of a children's subject heading or a children's annotated heading. And this one has a B to show that it is not an adult LC heading. And it has SJ to show that it is a juvenile heading. So remember the adult ones had SH. The authorized term is buried treasure for the children's heading. So in our Polaris catalog, we would also use buried treasure in a 650 with the second indicator 1 as shown on the bottom of the screen, and then a subdivision of fiction. And this would only be for juvenile level materials. We wouldn't use it in, you know, a book, an adult book's bib record. While we're here, can this subject heading be subdivided geographically? Okay, good. I got a no, a couple of no's. And I got the answer to my next question as well, which was, how can I tell? And there's a comment that there is a square. So in geographic subdivision, there is just a black square there, and it would have an I instead if we could subdivide geographically, or in other words, put a place name in a subfield Z after it. Oh, my screen is not advancing. I guess I had to click over there. I was looking at the chat. Okay, so the screen here just talks about subject heading strings and how we code them. In a MARC record, the main term goes under subfield A, and then we would have subdivisions X, Y, Z, and or V for each subdivision. So again, those strings narrow the focus, like we saw in that example for France. We had history or politics and government after the term. A form heading is like fiction or juvenile fiction, juvenile literature, pictorial works. So in other words, what is this work? Not what it's about. The form tells what it really is. Here's an example of a subject heading string. If we were cataloging Illinois in the War of 1812, then the subject heading would be Illinois with a subfield X, which is a form subdivision, history, and then a subfield Y for the time period, War of 1812. So it's not just a general work about Illinois, but in particular, the specific time period of the War of 1812 in Illinois history. Notice the coding on that, the 651, because it's a geographic subdivision or subject, I'm sorry, geographic term. And then first indicator is always blank in a 651. Second indicator is 0 because it's a Library of Congress subject heading. And these are just the types of subdivisions. And the subfields that you would use in a bib record when constructing the subject heading string with that subdivision. Some terms that you would use as a subdivision may also be valid as subjects on their own, like biography. So you have to look at the authority record for the subdivision and the authority record for the term itself and see how you're instructed to use those. And I think we pretty much covered each one of those in earlier examples. Here is antiquities, the authority record, as a subject. So again, in the 150, that's where we find the authorized form. Now let's look at the 360 here. That field gives us instructions to see also that term used as a subdivision. In case you can't see it very well on your screen, it says subdivision antiquities under names of countries, cities, etc., ethnic groups existing in modern times. Example, Aboriginal Australians, antiquities, and individual wars. An example is United States History, Civil War, 1861 through 1865, antiquities. So again, it can be used under names of countries, cities, etc., ethnic groups existing in modern times as a subdivision. And now here is the authority record for antiquities as a subdivision. How can we tell that it's a subdivision record instead of a separate, a subject term? There's actually three ways, I guess at least, in this record that tell me that it's a subdivision instead of a topical term. Okay, good. I'm seeing some things in the chat here. It has a 180 field. So there is no 680 in a bib record. And remember how I said all subject headings go in a 6XX field? So when you see an 80 here, then that should give you a clue that you can't use it, in a bib record as a topical heading. There's also a code right before antiquities in that 180 where it says subfield X. So that's telling you you use it in a subfield X behind a topical term. And then, see if anybody else has put anything in here. Okay, so then up in the fixed field, there's a couple of things here to look at. Subject use B, which means I cannot use it as a general subject topical term. B means no, remember, and A means yes. Also, it cannot be subdivided geographically. Sometimes subdivisions are established specifically for a particular heading, like the example special effects. It is established under cinematography, and there's no separate authority record for special effects by itself as a subdivision. So this is just a string that was created. And other times you actually have to create the string yourself, by looking at the subdivision authority records and the topical terms and deciding what you can add on to that. So you can look at scope notes usually to figure out how to use it. And of course, you have to look at the fixed field elements, especially whether you can subdivide geographically and how it can be used. There are also free floating subdivisions that can be used usually under um, certain types of headings, but they're not really like established. I want to say like you can use them under a group of subject headings. So there's actually a bunch of free floating subdivisions that you can use under place names and only under place names. Um, but there's a lot of free floating subdivisions like fiction and juvenile literature, juvenile fiction that you can use after about everything. So again, you do have to look at the scope notes in the subdivision record to see when you can use it and how you can use it. And we'll look at some resources later to help you with those. There used to be this handy little book, but nothing comes in a book anymore, but this free floating subdivision guide, but now it's all online, but you can still access it. I just like to have everything in my hands, touch it with my fingers sometimes. I guess I'm old fashioned that way. Okay, so established subdivisions. Like I said earlier, this special effects was established as a subdivision directly after cinematography. Um, so it does not have its own separate authority record for the subdivision by itself. This is just a string you would enter in the record as a 650 with a second indicator 0, cinematography in the subfield A, and then a subfield X, special effects. So sometimes LC just creates an authority record for complete string, and then you don't have to, figure it out for yourself. It's usually when there's a huge bunch of records that would use that. Also, sometimes LC creates subject heading strings for validation purposes, just so that the subject will control in the bib record. And I know you've seen that in connection where you can turn the line blue or control it. And so it's linking the field, the subject heading in this case, to the authority record. And so that's one of the reasons why these subject heading strings are created, just so that it will be able to validate the heading. Here's an example of a free floating subdivision that has a 680, a scope note telling us to use as a topical subdivision under names of cities and city sections. So pretty narrow. We can't use buildings, structures, etc. under states. We have to use it under cities and city sections, like it says. Okay, so there's, again, we talked about the 3 ways to tell that it's a subdivision record, not a subject. Um, we found the 180 and the subfield X, and then up in uh, the fixed field subject use, it had B because it cannot be used by itself. Okay, so just watch those scope notes to make sure that they can be used where you want to use them. That's the main lesson with this slide right here. Now we'll talk a little bit about pattern headings. They give you possible subdivisions for a particular kind of subject. Um, you should have a handout for pattern headings for LC subjects. If you take a look at that, you can see that there is a subject field on the far left, and then a category in the center, and then the pattern heading for that category is on the right. So telling you which subject heading you would look at to find more terms that can be used in subdivisions after a term. So let's look at an example. Well, first of all, if you want to see possible subdivisions for plants, you'd look under the pattern heading for plants and crops. And so that's on the second page. Under science and technology, we see plants and crops. And that leads you to the pattern heading, which is corn. So what that's telling me is I can look at corn for lots of subdivisions that I can use under any kind of plants or crops. So if I had a book about wheat and I didn't have the subdivision that I wanted listed under wheat, I could look under corn instead and find more choices. So here are just some more of those in case you don't have that pattern heading guide handy. So animals in general, fishes is the pattern heading. Domestic animals, you would look under cattle to find more subdivisions. For diseases, cancer or tuberculosis. For organs, you would look under heart, and for body regions under foot. We already talked about plants and crops. There's individual literary authors. We could look under Shakespeare, land vehicles, automobiles, and individual educational institutions, Harvard University. Those are just some of them. There's more listed on the paper you have, the handout for today. You do have to be a little bit careful with pattern headings because you don't want to use a chronological subdivision that really only applies to maybe Harvard University, and you don't want to use it under SIU, Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. Now we'll look at this next screen here. Here is an example of what carrots looks like. You just have the subdivisions, diseases and pests, marketing, varieties, and that's it. But now let's look. So remember, if we look at our pattern heading guide, plants and crops, our pattern heading is corn. So now let's look at corn. And these are all of the subdivisions that you see. And this is only the very beginning of the list. So much more than what you see under carrots. And it goes on and on and on for screens. So you can look at that later when we're actually in OCLC. If you did not get a copy of the pattern heading guide, you can always get it in OCLC, and here are the steps to put it, to save it as a favorite in your OCLC tab. So now it's time for a quick quiz. So take out your handout for the pattern headings if you don't have that out already. Question 1, and just feel free to type in the chat your answers. To determine the correct subdivisions for books about the Lutheran Church, what established subject heading do you use? Okay, so I see religion, Catholic Church, religion, Catholic Church. Okay, so what I'm looking for is the pattern heading that you would look at. So those of you who answered religion, you were on the right track. That's the subject field, but then you have to look for, okay, the Lutheran Church is a Christian denomination. So in that category, then I would choose Catholic Church as the pattern heading to find more subdivisions to use. So Catholic Church has lots of subdivisions, while Lutheran Church would only have a few, like carrots did. Question number 2. To determine the correct subdivisions for books about the brain, what established subject heading do you use? For those of you who didn't have that out, I'll just share this. Hopefully you can see it. Okay.
We're still just seeing the slide.
Oh, okay. I didn't share my, I just said share the slide earlier, I guess. Let me see if I can share that. Now, can you see it?
Now we've got it.
Okay. For those of you who didn't have it. Okay, and I did see some answers popping up in the chat. Heart or foot, heart, heart. Okay, so looking at this, we see organs and regions of the body. So if the question was about brain, that's an organ, so we would look at heart. If it was about a region of the body, then we would look at foot. So heart is the answer. And then question number 3. Are you seeing my quiz again?
Yes, we are.
Thank you. To determine the correct subdivisions for resources about symphonies, what established subject heading do you use? So again, pop this up. Good, I'm seeing some answers. that say operas. So we're going to look under musical compositions, and that's where we find the pattern heading, operas. Yay! Thank you for taking part in the quiz. This is a pretty good stopping point, I think, for a break. So let's plan on 10 minutes so everybody can get their caffeine and stretch and all you need to do. So we'll come back at about, I have 2 minutes till. So let's just do like 8 after. Okay, so this is a record for a form subdivision, and I can tell that because there is a 185 field with a subfield V. Subfield V is where we put form subdivisions after a topical or any kind of subject heading, I suppose. So this one is for personal narratives. And the 073 shows 2 places in the subject heading manual, H1095 and H1200, that give guidance on using this subdivision, but also in the 680, the scope note, we can see when to use this subdivision, when we can use this subdivision. So you would think personal narratives would be handy for lots of different things to put in as a form subdivision. But let's look at that scope note. It says use as a form subdivision under names of events and wars. So that means I cannot use it under farming for someone's experience running a farm, but I can use it under a war or some names of events. So I don't know exactly what that includes, but I guess we could look at H 1095 and 1200 to see what else, what other guidance it gives us. So to build subject heading strings, we find the appropriate subject heading. Usually I just, think of a keyword and I type that in as a search, and then it will lead me to the correct term. Look for established subdivisions that you can add on to that to make a string, and then look for other applicable subdivisions. You can add a form subdivision to say that it's fiction or juvenile literature or whatever it is after, at the end of the string. And you can always check pattern headings for more possibilities. Here's the preferred order of terms in a subject heading string. You would use the topical, or the general subject heading first, and then the topical subdivision, which goes in a subfield X, the geographic subdivision in a subfield Z, the chronological in a subfield Y, and then the form subdivision in a subfield V. That little asterisk there by geographic subdivision, there is no note at the bottom telling you about that, but that is just saying beware of that geographic subdivision because you have to be able to subdivide. And so you have to look at the authority record and decide whether you can, whether you're allowed to subdivide in that spot, in that space. So here's kind of the screen explaining that a little better with an asterisk again. So place follows the last element that allows the geographic subdivision. Check the code in the geographic subdivision fixed field element. If there's an I, then you can subdivide geographically. If there's a blank or a fill character, then you cannot subdivide geographically. So it might be topic, place, topic. If the last element does not allow you to subdivide geographically, or it might be topic, topic, place, if the last topical element does allow you to subdivide geographically. Here's an example. National parks and reserves has an I. Therefore, we can put a Suffield Z, Illinois, another Suffield Z, Springfield, if we wish, after National Parks and Reserves to show the ones in Springfield, Illinois. But here's an example of when we cannot subdivide history with a place. So if we want to make a subject string for the history of national parks and reserves in Springfield, we have to do national parks and reserves and then Illinois, then Springfield, and history goes last in this case because we cannot put a place after history. Make sense? So I see there's a question. Oh, no, Pam said, if allowed, sometimes you'll have two Suffield Z's, such as France and Suffield Z Paris. So we'll talk about that in just a little bit and how to determine when you need to have two Suffield Z's. Here is another example. If you wanted a work about fees in national parks and reserves in Springfield, then we would code it in a 650 for a topical subject, second indicator blank. The main term, national parks and reserves, goes in Suffield A, fees in Suffield X, just like in the authority record. And then we can subdivide that geographically, so we can put Suffield Z, Illinois, and Suffield Z, again, Springfield. So, constructing geographic subdivisions. This is where it gets a little bit tricky. You have to know definitely to check the authority records for places. And the 781 field is the one that tells you, when using it as a subdivision, how it should be entered. When the topic applies to a country, continent, or region as a whole, you can just use that country, continent, or region in the Suffield Z. When the topic applies to a state, province, or territory of the United States, Canada, or Australia, then you add a geographic subdivision for the state, province, or territory, but don't include the larger jurisdiction. Like we wouldn't use United States or Canada or Australia. We would just use directly Missouri, the state, or we could use the Yukon, but we wouldn't we wouldn't use the country or province or territory first. Again, 781 for the place will tell us how we use it as a subdivision. For when the topic applies to a state, province, or territory of other countries, then you do add the state, province, or territory indirectly under the larger jurisdiction. So in this case, Bavaria does have Germany before it. Sonora State does have Mexico before it. So again, that 781 would tell us when to go through a larger jurisdiction and when not to. And we'll look at one of those in just a minute after we get through the rules. Okay, so when the topic applies to a city, a town, etc., in the United States, Canada, or Australia, add indirectly under the larger jurisdiction. So we can't just put St. Louis, we have to go through Missouri. So we do Birds, Sheffield Z, Missouri, Sheffield Z, St. Louis. Washington, D.C. is one that we do add directly though. So Birds, Sheffield Z, Washington, D.C. When the topic applies to a city, town, etc. in other countries, add indirectly under larger jurisdiction, the country. Do not include the state, territory, or province. So Berlin, we have to go through Germany. And Jerusalem is one that we do add directly. So always an exception here or there. So here are the authority records for Berlin and for Jerusalem. As you can see in the 781, for Berlin, we see Sheffield Z, Germany, Sheffield Z, Berlin. In other words, for any topic that we want to subdivide geographically, that is the form we use. However, under Jerusalem, it just says Sheffield Z, Jerusalem, so that's what we use. Moving on to chronological subdivision. That's when we want to narrow a subject to a particular time frame. So here are some examples of established subdivisions. United States, politics and government, 2001 through 2009. And we would use that for work about the 2008 US presidential election. So you have to look for the subdivision that applies to the time period you're looking for. We cannot just make up our own and use 2008 behind politics and government. So those strings are established by significant time periods for each country or place. Here is a scope note for 10th century as a chronological subdivision. Use as a chronological subdivision under headings for art and art forms of all nations, regions, and ethnic groups, except those headings for art and art forms of China, Japan, and Korea. So again, a little bit more specific than we might have thought. Under 21st century, it says use as a chronological subdivision under headings for art and art forms of all nations, regions, and ethnic groups. Also use under individual languages and groups of languages, groups of literary authors, individual literatures, including drama and forms and types of musical compositions. So a lot more that we can put 21st century after. Here are some chronological subdivisions for rock music. And if we looked at country music, we'd find a lot of the same time periods, but some earlier ones added as well. Here's some chronological subdivisions for a place, in this case, New Zealand. So again, it's just based on significant periods in New Zealand's history. And you can't use these same subdivisions for other places. This is specifically things in New Zealand history. This is just a little extra slide here that tells you some miscellaneous information. If you can't decide what subject heading to use, and the book is about the history or government of some place, always ask the question, whose history or whose government, because that's what you're going to start with. You're going to start with the place, and then you're going to tack on politics and government or history as a general subdivision. And then sometimes you will have reciprocal headings. In this case here on this slide, we have China, foreign relations, Brazil. Well, if the book is about the relations between China and Brazil, you have to do the reciprocal relationship as well. So Brazil, foreign relations, China. This is also what we do with foreign language dictionaries. If we had a German English dictionary where it had partially from German to English and the other part was English to German, then we would have German language dictionaries English and English language dictionaries German. So we do need to have both of those headings when that's the case. Then we'll talk a little bit about Library of Congress genre form terms for library and archival materials. For short, we call it LCGFT. And this is another controlled vocabulary, and it is one that we use in the SHARE database. They aren't Library of Congress subject headings, but they're genre and form terms. So they tell us what the resource is, not what it's about. It might indicate a category of material like that it's a mystery or that it's a spy film. It might show the form, that it is a cookbook, that it is an audio book. So a couple of examples, and well, one example and how it's coded here. It would be in the 655 in the bibliographic record with the second indicator 7. So you would put domestic fiction in the subfield A, and then subfield 2 gives the code LCGFT to tell what the source it came from. And one thing that's important to remember is that these genre terms cannot be subdivided. You cannot add any kind of subdivisions to the end of them. This is just an example of an authority record for a genre term. In this case, it is Western fiction. We can see that because that is in the 155. The the GF in the 010 tells us that it's a genre or form term. And there's my little one I was looking for. The authorized term is the 155. Again, we see subject use does have a here, so we can use it in the 655s. The Z just means that it's not a Library of Congress subject heading. And we cannot subdivide geographically. So we have a scope note there to tell when to use it. Fiction that features the American West during the period of westward expansion. That's the 680. Okay, now we'll move on to how they look like in bib records. And I kind of added a little bit of that when we were talking about authority records too. So just remember, when you're looking at the authority record, if it has 150, then that translates to the 650 in the bib record. So that would be a topical term. So any person as a subject would go in a 600, any corporate name in a 610, conference name 611, and then geographic terms 651, genre terms 655, and maybe local subject headings in a 690 if you use those. I know we have some people who aren't on the share database that may not use 690s. Here is a bib record that has lots of subject headings. So you can see an example of a 600, a person that it's about, a 650, lots of 650s, several 651s, and lots of subdivisions on each of these as well. So remember, if you have a subdivision, a place goes in a subfield Z, a general topical subdivision goes in an X, and a time period would go in a subfield Y, but I don't see one of those here. And then we also even have a form heading. This is essays. So what do catalogers do to add subject terms to bib records? Well, we have to try to figure out what the book is about. And I think this is the worst part. We have to examine the item. Sometimes it's nice enough to give us lots of information so we don't have to, read a whole lot of the book to figure it out or anything. But sometimes the title even gives you enough information to know what you're looking at. For example, if the title was Edgar Allan Poe, I still don't know for sure. Is it his life story? Is it short stories? Is it, his complete collection? I don't know, but maybe the subtitle then says his complete works. And so then I know exactly what it is. There might be an abstract, an introduction that you can read and find out more. preface, you can look at the table of contents, at the index and the bibliography. The jacket and the cover of the book is usually a really good place to find more information. Sometimes you do have to look at accompanying material like maybe a box that it came in or an insert in the container. Um, so first you want to identify the main subject and the author's point of view. So you want to determine what the author's intention is for the resource. And there's sometimes some cataloger's judgment involved. Different catalogers may make different decisions about what the subject headings should be, and that's fine. um, Sometimes you do have to go to external sources like bibliographies or catalogs. You might go to Amazon or Goodreads to find more information. And like I said earlier, I just try to think of a tentative wording or phrasing and search that in LCSH. And then maybe I would be led to the term that is correct for my item. Also check LCGFT for appropriate genre or form terms that might apply. And I think sometimes people just have a hard time deciding how broad or how narrow to go. Well, you want to go to the most specific term that accurately represents the content. If you have a book about dogs, don't use pets or domestic animals, use dogs. You can use usually a maximum of 6 subject headings, but sometimes one is all you really need. A couple of rules that you need to know about. The 2 or 3 related headings. When a work discusses 2 or 3 topics that are related and a heading exists that includes no other topics within its scope, assign the one heading instead of 2 or 3 narrower terms. So the example is by land, sea, and air, the story of transportation. Well, we can just use transportation history. Um, we don't need to do anything like for air travel and land travel and so on. Then there's a rule of 3. If a general topic includes in its scope more than 3 subtopics, but the work being cataloged discusses only 2 or 3 of those subtopics, assign the appropriate 2 or 3 headings rather than the broader heading. And the example here is South Carolina Fruit Tree Survey 2012, peaches and apples. So think about it. There are lots of kinds of fruit, and peaches and apples don't nearly cover all of the types of fruit. So since this book only talks about peaches and apples, those are the only 2 we want to include in our subject headings. It would be misleading to say fruit, South Carolina statistics. So we would do peach, South Carolina statistics, and apples, South Carolina statistics. And you may wonder why it's peach instead of peaches or apples instead of apple. And sometimes I don't understand why one is plural and one is singular, but if you try a keyword and you don't come up with what you're looking for, try the plural or singular form, depending on what you have tried already, and see if that helps you to find what you're looking for. The rule of 4. If a heading covers a very broad range and each subtopic forms only a small portion of that whole range, assign the 4 subtopics instead. A book discussing the works of 4 American authors could have a heading for each author, since American literature, history, and criticism covers the works of all American authors. But never exceed 4 subtopics. So if the book discussed 5 American authors, you would use American literature, history, and criticism instead of the separate names of each of those authors. It's just the rule. I'm just passing it along. Okay, the next one is 2 or 3 related headings. The example in praise of single parents, mothers and fathers embracing the challenge, we would use single parents, United States, not single mothers, United States, and single fathers, United States, because single parents already encompasses both, so we do not need to use separate terms. Okay, so these are just some of the places that might help you when you're trying to figure out subject headings. We'll do some searching in OCLC Connection as we are working on our exercises. And yeah, you can access all of those online except for maybe Library of Congress, Subject Headings, Principles and Application by Lois May Chan. I wonder if I still have that book. I used to have that right here on my shelf. So here are some links that are helpful. The free floating subdivision tells you when to use those. And the subject heading manual is that guide to tell you when to use specific subjects. I don't know if sometimes when you're in a slideshow, you can't actually click on the link and show it. Let me see if I can. Oh, it came up on the other side. Here we go. So you can see this free floating subdivisions is section H1095. And it just gives you information about free floating subdivisions. So I'm scrolling down a bit so I can show you. It starts with the list. I'm going to find, not know what I'm looking for. Okay. Here's one, aerial photographs, and it says use under names of countries, cities, etc., and under topical headings for collections or discussions of aerial photographs, including collections of reproductions of a place or topic. So that just tells you exactly where you can use that subdivision aerial photographs. And this is the scope note that you would find in the authority record. So you don't actually have to come here unless you want to. Maybe if you can't decide what free floating subdivision to even search for, you might just kind of look through this list, but it is lots of pages. But it's kind of a good idea to become familiar with all of the free floating subdivisions, just to help you to, I don't know, think what you can add to the end of your subject heading. Then the other link was to the subject heading manual. And it's popping up here so that this is just all of the different sections here, 1400, 2200. It tells you exactly what all of the sections are here. So you might want to just take a look at that and see if there's any particular section you want to look at more closely. And they do, you can see it's always being revised. So this section here for geographic subdivisions was last revised in August of 2020. It's still being revised, so don't worry that you see some that say 2013 there. So anyway, I'm just going to close that out. So are there any questions before we start in with some of the searching OCLC? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, so let me get out of this and go to OCLC. I'll go ahead and log in. Now, if you don't have OCLC connection on your computer, you could go to authorities.loc.gov and you can search authorities there just as well. If you want to kind of follow along or do some of these on your own, that will help you probably to think of terms that you want to try and see where you might go wrong with picking a certain keyword or where it's the correct one that you really should be looking for. Okay, so I'm just in connection and first of all, before I start on the exercises for today, I just wanted to do a quick Shift F2 is how I get to the authority record. And so if I was looking for a name, I could do that here as a keyword search, a corporate name, a title. A title would be more like a series. And then a topical subject heading, a genre term. I can also find geographic terms here. Remember that the little extension here, this little GG, that is what I use if I want to do a scan search in the command line search up here. So like I did scan GG Illinois, so then I could find Illinois, and there's 141 matches. And so then when I click on it, I can see all of the subdivisions that I could use. So just looking at this, if I wanted to put it in a bib record, because Illinois is a 151, I would put it into the 651 in the bib record. If I wanted to use, let's say, genealogy as my subdivision, this is how it would look. Suffield v. Genealogy after Illinois. Um, so if you look at the authority record, you can tell exactly how to code it. You can pretty much tell from this previous screen as well, but it is nice to just go ahead and click on it so you can see everything. And plus, if there was a scope note, it would be nice to know that. And of course, whether you can subdivide geographically or not. Okay, I do want to do another quick search for, we looked at carrots in the slide, and we looked at corn. If I do a search for wheat, I get quite a few subdivisions, but that's about it. What's on the screen, right? Oh, maybe there's more. Okay, right to about there, down to varieties. So that's about it. But then, as we were talking about pattern headings earlier, if I look at corn, we might want to do that one as a scan SP. So I can see there's 395 subdivisions there. So it goes to the bottom and I have to page down and keep paging down to get more, as you can see. So there's much more under the pattern heading for corn. Okay, so I'm trying to decide whether to start in and do a few or if we should take a break and then start in to do them. Let's go ahead and just do a couple and then we'll take a break around 11. Okay, so do you all have the this paper right here? This is what we'll be working on. So the question is number 1, recent foreign policy of Australia. So if I am searching in the authority file, what term do I want to start with? Recent foreign policy of Australia. Oh, and Pam's saying authorities.lsc.gov is a little wonky today, or maybe it's just her. Oh, good. Okay, so I'll go ahead and do the search in OCLC instead in the authority file. So she's saying maybe Australia, foreign policy. So let's do a search, and I'll just use the geographic name. So again, like before in one of those slides, it said if it's a history or politics and government, we say whose history, whose politics and government. So maybe here we can say whose foreign policy and start with Australia. So that's where I'll start. And I get this huge list where Australia isn't until quite a ways down. When I am on a screen like this, I do view, navigate records and lists, and go to the next 100 to see what comes next. So I'm looking for something like foreign policy. So I see, here we go, Australia, foreign relations. And so that sounds good. So now it said recent foreign policy. if I look at this, we've got 1900 through 1945, but then another period after that is an open-ended date, 1945 on. So that is the most recent time period for foreign relations. And I'll go ahead and double click on it and look at the authority record. So now looking at this authority record, what field would I use in the bib record to record this? Okay, good. 651, because the second two digits here are 51. And we know that subjects always go in the 6 XX fields. So anything beginning with a 6. So 651, the first indicator is blank, but the second indicator would be 0 to show that it's a Library of Congress subject heading. And then we would put Australia, Suffield X, Foreign Relations, Suffield Y, 1945. So it should look something like this. Whoops, 0, I mean. And in OCLC, you don't have to put that. Well, I'll just do it this way. Suffield X, Foreign Relations, Suffield Y, 1945 dash. So just like that authority record was, that's how I put it in there. Okay, so the next one is a little harder than that. Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, a criticism. So we could start in a couple different places on this one. What pops into your mind? I'll do Shift F2. So, okay, I've seen literary criticism, literature. Those are both broad. Think a little bit more specific. Which piece of literature are we looking at? Okay, there's the author, John Steinbeck, and Grapes of Wrath is the title. So we are specifically wanting a criticism of Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. I think I would start with the title, Grapes of Wrath, just to see what I get. If you wanted to start with Steinbeck, John, that's fine too, but I'm going to start here and just see what comes up. So I did a title, Grapes of Wrath, and I do get Steinbeck, John, 1902 through 1968, Grapes of Wrath. And I'm going to go ahead and open that and see what it says, see if there's any kind of scope note or anything else about this that I might need to know or how to code it. Okay, so there's no 680 at all. So if I want to put this in as a subject in the bib record, what field would I put that in? Thanks, Pam. It goes in a 600 because, again, subjects go in sixes. The second two digits here are 00, so we're going to use a 600. And we're just going to code it like 600. The first indicator would be a 1 because there is a first indicator 1 here in the authority record. And so we use the same first indicator there. Hopefully you can see that. And then the second indicator would be a 0 because it's being used as a Library of Congress subject heading in the bib record. So in the subfield A, I do Steinbeck, John, and then a subfield D, 1902 through 1968, just like it is in the record, followed by a period. And then subfield T, Grapes of Wrath. And a period goes at the end of the line. The problem is that this subject heading does not take into account the criticism. So I'm going to do another search and just look for a subdivision record for something like criticism. So I can look under subdivision headings and type criticism and see what I get. And I get lots of different things. So these are all subdivision records because they have subfield X here. So you can see that they go after something else. Here's criticism and interpretation, criticism form, criticism, interpretation, etc. Criticism narrative, all. Okay, so let me just start at the top here. I'm going to try criticism and interpretation. Well, not really at the top, but the top of the criticism area. Okay, so this scope note says, use as a topical subdivision under names of individual persons for works of critical analysis or interpretation of the person's artistic works or endeavors without biographical details. So it does not say that I can use it after the title, Grapes of Wrath, but I can use it for, after John Steinbeck if I want. Just hold on to that in our minds for a minute. We'll take a quick peek at criticism form. It says use as a topical subdivision under uniform titles of sacred works. So that's out for sure. That is not what we want. Criticism, interpretation, etc. Use as a topical subdivision under uniform titles of sacred works. So that one is out as well. And then, whoops, I keep slipping here. Criticism narrative uses a topical subdivision under uniform titles of sacred works again. Let's see, maybe textual. Use as a topical subdivision under names of individual persons, individual works, author title or title entries, and individual literatures. So if we thought this was a textual criticism, we could use this subdivision after an author title. But I kind of like this one better to use under John Steinbeck, criticism and interpretation. That's the one that you definitely see more. So what I would do is leave this 600 that we've already put in there and add another 600. But this one would be Steinbeck, John, subfield D, 1902 through 1968, and then just a subfield V, X, criticism and interpretation to match what is here. So did that make sense why we cannot use criticism and interpretation after this Grapes of Wrath subject? Excuse me. So you always have to look at the the scope note. Okay, so this is a good time for a break. We'll just take a quick 5 minutes so I can get my voice back. And I have 2 minutes after 11, so I'll see you at 7 after. Sorry, that was a super quick break, but I hope that gave you a chance to stretch at least. I know it's a very long class, but it has a lot of details to it. And this is the time of the class when I really, really miss being, in a classroom setting, being with all of you so I can just kind of let you do the exercises and I can walk around and give helpful hints. I feel like I'm just doing all of the work and not giving you a chance to really think about what you want to search. So on number 3, wood carving for fun and profit. Think about what term you would use to search in the authority file first. Okay, so wood carving. That makes sense, right? Let's move this out of the way and just try. Shift F2. I'll just do a topical wood carving and see what we get. 135 matches. Wood carving is down here. We have a children's subject heading, wood carving. Then we also have the adult term, which is wood dash carving. So I'll start with that one. There's nothing on our paper that says this is a juvenile material. So we'll just look for the adult term. And I think that's really all we need for this one. So think about now what tag you would put it in the bib record. You can type that in the chat if you want, or go ahead and fill it out on your paper here. So I'll go ahead and start doing mine. I'll use a 650. First indicator is blank. Second indicator is 0 for Library of Congress. In the subfield A, we'll use wood dash carving, and we have a period at the end of the line. Okay, and I think there's nothing for fun and profit that we need to worry about. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one. Mario Andretti, the man who can win any kind of race.
Shelley, there's a question about wood carving.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see.
Maybe using
Not
hobbies.
Well, we try to be as specific as possible. So if it's only wood carving and we had hobbies, we might lead people there when they really didn't want that, want that book. Yes, too broad. Okay. So next one is Mario Andretti, number 4. So on this one, we need a couple of different subject headings. One won't do it. Anytime we have a book about a person, we definitely need a subject heading for that person's name. So we need to look him up in the authority file because We don't know birth and death dates or anything like that, or middle initial or whatever. We need to know exactly the form he was established in. So Andretti, there we go. Hopefully I spelled it right under personal name, and I'll click OK. And there he is. So this is how I would put it in the record, but instead of putting it in a 100, I'm going to put it in a 600 because that's where the subject headings go. So real quickly, 600, first indicator 1, second indicator 0. Andretti, I better make a space there. It looks kind of run together. You can't tell. 1940 dash. But I also need to know what he is, what he did, so that I can add a topical heading. So what do you think? Right here it says he's a champion race driver. So I could start searching some way like that, maybe. Anybody have anything pop into their head? A race car driver, possibly, yeah. So I'll try topical. Race car driver. Nothing. So let's try automobile driver. Not what I'm looking for. So we'll try again. Race. I'm not sure. I'm just going to try racing and see what I get. Okay, automobile racing. Is there anything about the drivers? Here we go. Automobile racing drivers. And there is one right underneath that showing the Suffield V biography, which is already, the string is already created for us here. So anytime it's about a person, we usually use the Suffield V biography. So we'll go ahead and use that one. So again, the tag that it goes in is 650 in this case, because there's a 150 here. And so first indicator is blank, second indicator is 0. Subfield A is automobile racing drivers, and then subfield V is biography. I want to just real quickly show you if I do a subdivision heading for biography, if this was not already a built string for me, I could look under biography and see that we have one for Suffield V and another Suffield X. So it is a biography. It's not about biographies. So that's why we use the one with the Suffield V. And it says use as a form subdivision under names of countries, cities, etc., names of individual corporate bodies, uniform titles of sacred works, and under classes of persons. So a class of person is a race car driver, an author, a librarian, a whatever, you know, any grouping that people fit into is a class of person. So sometimes this reads a little difficult, maybe, but that's what classes of persons means. So then there's some others, but we found what we were looking for, that biography can go under, after automobile racing drivers. Notice one thing it does not say about biography: you cannot use it under the name of an individual person. So I would not have Andretti Mario 1940 Suffield v biography. That would not be valid. Oops, coming back here. Sorry, lost that. Put that back and get this back over here. Okay, I already finished that one. Automobile racing drivers, Suffield v biography. So some of you may have gone ahead to thinking about the next one while I wandered along to other topics, but medieval goldsmiths' work. Think about a keyword to search by. So I'll do Shift F2 and oh, there's something big in the chat. Let me see what this says. Let's see. Exception. Biography has been established and may be used under the names of 4 individuals: Shakespeare, William, Mohammed, Prophet, Jesus Christ, and Mary, Blessed Virgin Saint. Do not submit a proposal to establish biography under the name of any other individuals. And that's from H 1330. Very interesting. Thank you. Okay, so the next one was medieval goldsmiths' work. So how about goldsmithing? Well, that leads me to what I'm looking for, at least. A goldsmith does gold work, and there's even one here for medieval, which is what I needed. So that looks to be a good subject heading for my book. And so here, goldsmithing led me to gold work. So let's just put it in our answer sheet. So 650 blank 0. And the Suffield A is gold work medieval. Period at the end of the line. Okay. Next one, ABCs of air conditioning. Not getting too many answers in the chat from anybody. ABCs of air conditioning. So that makes me think of just general maybe everything about air conditioning, something kind of like that. So air conditioning is probably where I would start. So topical heading, right? Air conditioning. And I got lots of results, but air conditioning, let's see, what would fit? Maybe handbooks, manuals, etc. If it was a guide to how to fix your own and work you know, everything you need to know about it, maybe. So that's probably a good one. I'm going to go ahead and use that one to start with, I think. So I'll go ahead and open that and see how it's coded, and that there's no 680 telling me any specific way to be used. So I'll go ahead and use that. 650, second indicator 0, air conditioning. Field V, because that's how it's coded here, handbooks, manuals, etc. So it is a handbook and manual, so that's why it has a V for a form heading. I'm going to go back to the other screen just a minute here. I noticed this maintenance and repair up here under equipment and supplies, but there is no air conditioning maintenance and repair. And if I wanted to put in a subject, something like maintenance and repair, I need to know if I can. So I'm going to just do a subdivision heading, maintenance and repair, and see what comes up, since there isn't one built already. So this one says, use as a topical subdivision under types of objects, including machinery, vehicles, structures, individual musical instruments, and families of instruments, requiring maintenance and repair. So that would work fine under air conditioning. It's a type of object, including machinery. Let me look under repairing. This one says use as a topical subdivision under types of objects not requiring maintenance. So I like maintenance and repair. Makes sense? So again, we're looking at those scope notes. So I can add a second 650, and this one can be air conditioning, subfield X, maintenance and repair. There is also a genre heading for manuals, and I can't think of what it is at this moment. So I'm going to do a search for genre. It's something like handbooks and manuals or something like that. So I'm just going to do a genre search for manuals, and I found it, handbooks and manuals. So this is an LCGFT term, and so I could add a 655 in the bib record, handbooks and manuals, and code it with a subfield 2 LCGFT, because that seems to be what my item is. And because in my subject headings, I had already used this handbooks, manuals, etc. So I know the 655 is also good to use with that. So I coded it with the second indicator 7 to show that it does have a source code in a subfield 2 to follow it. So it looks like that. Kind of small, I know. Let's see. Well, oh, that's, no, I can't get bigger unless I make it full screen, maybe. No, it's not going to let me get bigger than that. Okay, so the next one is studies in neurology. Anybody new have a thought on what we look under? Has anybody hopped ahead and done it already? Neurology, okay. Let's try it. Sounds good to me. Shift F2, topical heading, neurology. And let's see, there it is. Neurology. So studies. When we say studies in any particular topic, case studies is actually the form heading that we can use for that. So I think we're good to use this heading that's already here for us. And I'll go ahead and bring this back over and type it in. So we want to use a 650 with the second indicator 0, neurology, Suffield V case studies, period at the end. And if I have any typos, I'm sorry, I'm just typing quickly. All right, so the next one is an outline of government in Connecticut. Whose government? Connecticut. So we'll start with Connecticut. And once you start thinking like the Library of Congress, you might not have to, look so many up, but it's always good to look at scope notes and stuff like that. Connecticut. Okay. Now this one, it might have been better if I did a scan search because I get lots and lots of matches and I have to do navigate to the next 100, but then I get to it. Okay, so Connecticut, we were looking for government. So the subdivision for government is, anybody? Politics and government. Okay, so we want to use this subject right here, Connecticut, politics and government. And then, yes, Mary, we do want to put it in a 651. Okay, so again, it's so much nicer to have a room full of people all searching in the computer to find the answers and then kind of sharing what we found. But this is the only way I know to do it in an online class like this. Oh, there, I really messed that up. Government. Okay. So it's coded like that. Connecticut, politics and government in the subfield X. Great South Carolinians. So anytime we're talking about people, there's a subdivision that we can use after it. But we want to know first, we want to start with South Carolina. But I mean, we almost don't even have to search this one because we know that all states are going to be in the authority file. I'm going to do that as a scan search instead. Scan GG, South Carolina. And then we'll open this and take a look at it. So here is biography. So the people of South Carolina, this is the heading we would use. So again, because it's a place, it belongs in a 651 field. First indicator is blank, second is 0. And subfield A, South Carolina. Subfield V, biography. I'm just using a $ for the delimiter in all of these, and you may get, different, you may use something different, obviously, in your database, but I thought it looks kind of like what is in there. Okay, getting to the end, we have FBI, how the agents use science as well as weapons to fight crime. So you don't usually find abbreviations. You don't find FBI. If you searched it, you might not have a whole lot of luck. So what would we search instead of FBI? Most likely we would spell it out, right? Yes, Federal Bureau of Investigations. So what does that come under? It's not a personal name. It's not a place. It's not a title or a topic or a genre. It's actually a corporate or conference name. It's a corporate name. So if I type Federal Bureau of Investigations, that does not do it for me. Let's try again. Federal Bureau. I'm going to stop there, see what I get. Okay, so it looks like we would use United States first, most likely. Let me see here. Because I'm seeing, the different places. Navigate. So United States Bureau of. Okay, keep scrolling. Sorry if I'm making anybody dizzy. And here it is. So that's just something you kind of learn that Federal Bureau of Investigation is under United States. And I'll open that and take a look at the authority record. So this one, we're going to use a 610 since it's a corporate body. And we're going to code it pretty much just like it is there with the first indicator 1, but we'll use the second indicator 0 for Library of Congress subject heading. And then United States, period, subfield B, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And I think that's where I had a problem earlier. I said Federal Bureau of Investigations with an S. And so that's why I didn't get it. But if I would have typed just Federal Bureau of Investigation first, I probably would have gotten to this easier. So you do have to sometimes think about whether it's singular or plural and try it both ways. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and type it in here. 61010 United States Federal Bureau of Invest. Okay, investigation. But it's not just about the FBI. The question was how the agents, well, the topic is how the agents use science as well as weapons to fight crime. So we might need something else. And I happen to know that criminal investigation is a valid Library of Congress subject heading. So then I could maybe look there and see if something works. These are all just subdivided by place and then not handbooks, manuals, etc. We don't want to know how to do it. We want something else. But criminal investigation will definitely work. I'm going to just out of the blue look for a subdivision heading for something like methods. I'll just do method. Nope. Methods. That's a lot of stuff having to do with music. And wait a minute, it wouldn't be use a form subdivision under individual musical instruments and families of instruments. So I could use methods under woodwinds or clarinets, but I can't use it under the FBI. Again, this one is the same way. So the term I'm looking for, I might have had to look in the H1095s just to see what all the choices are, but I'm going to go ahead and say methodology to look at that. Uses a topical subdivision under disciplines for works on both the theory and practice of procedures to be followed. So I just happened to know that methodology is the work, the form, the standard subdivision for procedures to be followed for something. So I think that is what I would use after criminal investigation. So we go back and we add the 650 for criminal investigation. And then we add subfield X methodology because this seemed to fit with a scope note after criminal investigation. So that's just, whoops, that's the wrong page. Sorry. Come back here. Okay, so that's what we did. Okay, we're down to the last one. A documentary history of the Union Trust Company of New York. Okay, so whose documentary history? the Union Trust Company of New York. That's where I'm going to start. And what is the Union Trust Company of New York? Well, first, let's just do the company and see if it tells us more information. So we're going to do a corporate. Union Trust Company. And that's enough. So I see, oh goodness, Union Bank and Trust, Union Trust Company, and here's of New York. Notice there are several different Union Trust companies in different locations. So we want of New York, and that is how we would enter it in the 610 with the first indicator 2 and a second indicator 0. Since it's a documentary history, we can use the Suffield X history after anything. So I'm going to do 610 to blank Union Trust Company of New York, Suffield X history. But that's just the company. We also need another heading to tell what this company does. So I'm just going to search trust companies and see what comes up. Well, if I could type, I would. Okay, so trust companies. Here we go. We have ratings and rankings, real estate investments. We don't need either of those. We don't want it to be followed by United States. We would want to be a little bit more precise and say in New York. So trust companies is a good start. Can we subdivide it geographically if we want to add New York? Yes, we can because of this little I right there. Okay, so now how do we put New York in? So then we have to do a quick geographic search for New York to see what we get. Oh, and of course, I'm not starting in the A, so I'm starting up here with a scan search instead. You just have to try sometimes and find that it's too much trouble to start with the A's and scroll down through lots of screens. Sometimes the scan search will get you there a little better. And I've noticed that Edie does the scan search most of the time, and I do keyword searches most of the time, but um, whatever works for you is fine. So we have New York City, but we don't want New York City. We want the state of New York. So New York, that's New York, New York. We're going to have to go down some more. So I'm going to page down. And here we have it, New York State. So I'll take a look at that. I don't know what I did to that authority record, but it thinks I changed something. So it's coming up now. Okay, so New York State. So if I had a history of New York State alone, I would use the 651 New York State, and then I would put Suffield X history. But I don't. I have a book about trust companies, and I want to subdivide with New York. So I have to look for that 781, I believe it is, and see if there is one. And it is right here at the bottom of the record. It says Suffield Z, New York State. And so that's how I would enter it in a Suffield Z. So going back to this, I wanted to put a 650 in, blank 0, trust companies, and a Suffield Z, New York State. And I don't need a period after a parenthesis. Okay, so that is all of our exercises. Are there any questions? I didn't save a whole lot of time. You can unmute yourself if you have a question. Should Union Trust be in 610 with first indicator 2 or a 61020? Oh, it should have a 0. Thank you very much. The second indicator is 0 there to show that it's Library of Congress subject heading. Anything else? I could have typos. Hopefully not, but I can email the answer sheet to participants if you would like a copy, unless you had plenty of time to write them all down. Okay, there's a question on the grapes of wrath. Could you use the table of pattern headings under A Wolf? Let's see. Well, so our table of pattern headings. Under literary works, entered under the title. I guess I could, if I didn't find exactly what I was looking for, in that list that I found earlier. So let me go back to that one. Criticism and interpretation was under the author. So Shakespeare is probably where I would have had to look to find criticism and interpretation already built in a string, I would say. The next question, would you ever repeat a V or a Y in a 6XX? V, you don't. That comes last, and I would say no, you wouldn't repeat that. Like if it was a juvenile fiction work, you wouldn't say fiction and then juvenile fiction. You would just say juvenile fiction. If so, you're talking about the form of the work there. If it was two separate things, I would say you need two separate subject headings with the Suffield V. Suffield Y, let me think about that time period. I don't think so. I don't think you would repeat a Suffield Y. I can't say I've ever seen one. You might have to go back to a broader time period if, like you're looking at United States history. Actually, you'd have two separate subjects listed in your record. If you had one for a time period of the 20th century and then the 21st century also, you'd have two separate United States history subjects listed. She says, now you know how my brain works. I know that you can repeat X and Z, but then I started thinking about V and Y. Okay, that's fine. The great thing is a lot of those strings are already built for you when you're searching. Um, so you can find exactly what you're looking for, but you may need to pull two of those strings that go with your item, you may need to put two of those in your bib record, just not repeating them in the same subject. Okay, good. Well, any other questions? Not seeing anything, but if you think of something later, after the class, you can always feel free. I'll type my email address in here. And Edie is E. Elliott at IllinoisHeartland.org. So Stone at IllinoisHeartland.org or E. Elliott at IllinoisHeartland.org to ask either one of us questions about the presentation today or anything about subject headings. It's not uncommon for us to get emails asking, I can't think of a subject heading, I can't think of a Dewey number, I can't, can you help me with this item? And so we are happy to help in any way we can. Good, glad you enjoyed it. And well, maybe that wasn't the proper word, enjoy a 3-hour class on subject headings, but glad it was helpful. Thanks everybody for coming. And oh yes, we will have a recording if anybody is interested in seeing a recording of it, or if you know a coworker that missed it, I can provide that as well. Thanks.